So now I'm going to demonstrate how to prepare a fore-rib of beef for roasting. So in front of me I have this beautiful piece of meat, fore-rib of beef. You can see here that the meat is darkened. This is a sign that it's been well hung and well aged. So basically what's happening in here is that this allows the natural enzymes within the meat to break down, and over time as that's hung, that will help to tenderise and flavour the meat. Now as the meat's been cut here, you can see that we have a very much brighter red to the eye of the meat there. That's because this hasn't oxidised, this hasn't had exposure to the air until it was recently cut. But what you can see from here is the marbling of the meat and the fat structure. So it's important that meat does have what's referred to as marbling, and that is the little fine pieces of fat that are speckled throughout the eye of the meat. It also has a nice coverage of fat on the top, not too much and not too sort of sinewy, but this will also help to keep the meat moist as it cooks. So as this heats through, the marbling tends to melt, the fat melts, it helps to flavour the meat, helps to keep the meat nice and moist as it's roasting. So I'm just going to take the piece of meat now. So you'll notice that I'm preparing this piece of meat on a red board. This is to signify that it's red meat that we're working with. So red we use for red meat so it doesn't get cross-contaminated with any other type of product. So we're going to roast this on the bone, and the bones will develop flavour as they go through the roasting process and give the meat, the eye of the meat, a natural protection from any direct heat from a pan. But what we need to do is make sure that this is secured, because at the moment it could wobble around. So I'm just going to use a few pieces of string to tie the meat. So here I have some butcher's string, so it's red and white, and I'm just going to tie a knot in the end of it. So we have a knot there, and a fairly straightforward tying process. So this goes underneath the meat, we pull it over into position, make a simple loop knot, butcher's knot, slip knot, and we're going to tie that, make sure it's around the fat slightly. Into place and just secure. We can just trim. So we'll do another one in between the bones. So we've got one here and one here. So this time I'll turn the meat to the side so I can try and show you exactly what I did there. So I've got a knot at the top of my string here, and we're going to place that underneath the beef in between the two bones. And I'm going to pull this around. The knot goes underneath, goes round and underneath itself to form a little slip knot. And then we pull the slip knot up until we're happy with the position. We pull it until it's nice and tight. We need it to be tight so that it sits on the bone. We pull that tight, not too tight so it actually breaks the meat, but it has a little bit of tautness. Once we're happy, we just tie off the knot and we can trim off the excess string, like so. So the meat is now ready to roast, so we can begin the roasting process. So now we're ready to roast our rib of beef. What I have here is my roasting tray, and in the base here I've just put some root vegetables. So this is known as a trivet of vegetables, which again helps to add a little bit of flavour and a little bit more protection for the meat itself. So what I need to do next is just make sure that the meat is well seasoned. So before we sear it off, and I have a pan with a little oil in there, and we're going to sear it pretty much like we would sear a steak or something else. But first of all we're going to season it. So we can add a little bit of oil just to help the process. And we are going to season it well with a fair amount of salt and pepper. And we can spin this round and give the same to the other side. So we try and season it as well as we can. Get loads of salt and pepper on the outside, and this will help to infuse those natural flavours, bring them out, and also it will help when we come to make our roast gravy in a little while. So we've got some fat there, just get that going, and nice seasoning. Okay. So I have a pan here. Now for the purposes of this demonstration, normally use a bigger pan or a roasting tray to sear it directly in, but I'm using an induction hob here, and I have to use a pan of this size to cope today, but it will fit. So basically I'm going to start by searing this side of the meat, so I can see that the oil is starting to smoke, and it should make a lovely sound as it starts to sear. Now as it starts to sear the outside of the meat, what's happening is the proteins are starting to caramelise, and you get that lovely meaty flavour. It's called the Maillard reaction, and it's the amino acids, the proteins that are cooking and caramelising during this time, providing a seared outside and developing that lovely flavour. So this shouldn't take very long. We have to, because of the size of the meat, I'm going to have to use a clean cloth and my hands, making sure that I'm always safe, of course. So we can see that's starting to take a lovely colour. So I'm not using a fork at this point because I don't want to insert any stabbing into the meat, which will basically release juices and make the meat not bleed but lose moisture. So we have a nice sear on that side, and then finally you can see there, just colour this fat on the outside. During the preparation I mentioned that we've kept these bones at the back of the eye of the meat. These will also act as a natural trivet which protects the eye of the meat here from any direct contact with the pan, so it's not frying and sticking to the bottom of the pan. So the meat is roasting without any direct contact with any metal or any other object. So you can see now it's got a nice sear. Okay, that the meat's looking good. We can drop a little bit more oil into that, and we're now going to pop this into the oven. Turn my induction off, and we can pop this into the oven at 180 degrees. This is a 4 kilo piece of meat, so this is going to take about 20 minutes per 450 grams of meat, plus 20 minutes over if you want to cook it rare. To cook it medium, you'd extend that by 5 minutes and 25 minutes towards the end of the cooking process. And to cook it more well done, you would extend that to 30 minutes and 30 minutes at the end of the process. But with such a beautiful piece of meat, we're going to cook it to a sort of rare, medium rare, because that's when I believe it's at its very, very best. So this is off to the oven to roast. So the rib of beef's been in the oven, so I'm happy with it. I'm just going to recheck the core temperature by using my probe. So I'm just going to carefully insert my probe into the centre of the meat. Okay, and that's coming in just at 50 degrees, 51 degrees. So I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to leave that to rest. So now I'm just going to place the meat onto a tray that I have here, and we're just going to let that rest for about half an hour, just so that the proteins in the meat can just relax, which will aid the carving process. If I'm to carve it straight away as it's come out of the oven, it's going to be very difficult to carve. I'm not going to get the sort of portion control that I want from it, because it will be too tense to carve it properly. So I'm just going to use a clean cloth to hold the bones and place a fork underneath, and we're just going to place that onto my tray. So the beef is now ready to relax, and I have my juices here and my vegetables from which I can make my sauce. Okay, so whilst the meat is resting, I'm going to concentrate on the other elements of the dish. So here I have the gravy, or the roasting jus. Okay, so what we've done here is that we've deglazed the roasting pan with some beef stock, and we've given that a good shake around to release all the flavours and any caramelisation left from the vegetables and the meat. And from there we've strained it into a saucepan like this one. And from there, we didn't want it to be too thin so that it just runs off the plate. So what we've done is added some starch. So we've diluted some starch. You can use potato starch, fecule, or an arrowroot, or a cornstarch. So you first of all dilute that, add it gradually to your roasting jus, just so that you get the right consistency, and then adjust with salt and pepper to make sure that your seasoning is okay. We've also got to think about the accompaniments. Now, the accompaniments for this dish traditionally are Yorkshire puddings. So that's a batter which is baked in a mould into the oven. And we want some vegetables. So today we've got some roast parsnips, we've got some French beans, and we've got some carrots, and we've also got some roast potatoes. And one of the other traditional accompaniments to this dish is horseradish sauce and watercress. Okay, so the meat has now rested for half an hour, so we're ready to serve. I've got my vegetables heated, my Yorkshire puddings are all ready to go, the sauce is ready to go, and I have my accompaniments in the form of the horseradish sauce and the watercress. So I'm now going to snip the string and remove the string from the beef. So we'll carefully just take this away. And now we're going to remove the beef from the bone. So this is where my work earlier on in the process should help, because we're just going to take the eye away from the rest of the meat. So there we have the bone. And I'm using a yellow board on this occasion because the meat is now cooked, so therefore we don't want to contaminate it with anything else. So, as I said earlier, the bones were simply there for flavour and to help us construct. And now we're ready to carve the meat. So with a carving knife, a nice sharp carving knife, we're going to cut across the grain. So we'll just place a couple of these slices onto our plate, like so. And then we'll get our accompaniments. Be heated through and put on some draining paper and our Yorkshire puddings. And we can now start to position this with the rest of the dish. So I'll pop on a Yorkshire pudding, 2 or 3 carrots, some nice little turned roast potatoes, a few French beans, some of our watercress. It's a traditional accompaniment. Make sure our Yorkshire's standing proudly. A little bit of horseradish sauce, and then finally just coat this all with our roasting jus. So there we have it, roast rib of beef with Yorkshire pudding and a selection of vegetables, horseradish sauce and watercress.